Grand. Okay, so the like Sandy has said, the Enuma Elish is one of those myths that involves dismemberment. It's a Babylonian creation myth, and it was found. It's written on 7 tablets with this cuneiform script, and many copies and fragments have been found in numerous places all over the Mesopotamian area, really. And the remarkable thing is that they're very similar. There's very little, it's quite conserved, which shows that it had a very fundamental, it had a very set use, right? And what it was that this poem that was written on these clay tablets was recited at the New Year's festival every year in Babylon and in other great cities. And what it did was it was kind of like a Saturnalian feast, you know. It was a time to come back into the story of their gods, the story of, you know, to touch the eternal, to kill the old year. So they would have sacrificed a goat and they would have had a hell of a lot of feasting. And there's some reports from the Greeks that the king would actually oblige by, you know, ritually mating with the goddess. Whether that happened or not, we don't know. Anyhow, so the poem starts out with it's actually an interesting one because it's sort of ex nihilo as well. The poem, it starts out with deities emerging from kind of like the sacred primal matter. But it's formless. There's no kind of like identity or anything. And you have the salt water and mixing with the sweet water, and there's no separation of sky or earth or sea or anything. And the gods themselves were nameless, natureless, and futureless. And the first deities to emerge were they were kind of inseparable from this, and they were named Apsu, which was sweet water river, river water, and Tiamat, who was salty water, and Mumu, a misty cloud. And I think their names translate to something like abyss, void, and bottomless pit, right? It's quite slow to get started. And they're still shapeless and inert, but then other gods emanate from them in couples. And as they emanate, they have form and the cosmos emerges, if you like. So like each time a new generation happens, there's more form, right? And you get an ordered cosmos. So first comes, I think, silt. I think it was silt, so which is soil and water mixed together, and that's Lamu and Lahamu. And then you have Asher and Kishar, which are the horizons of the sea and the sky. And then you get the sky god Anu and Ea, the earth. And these new gods, as form and sort of cosmos appeared, more and more gods arrived, and the newer gods became vigorous and turns out quite noisy. And they overcame their parents and great grandparents and so on. And eventually the primal mother, the salt water mother Tiamat, is slain in a super battle, which you're all going to hear about, by the the extra god. Marduk is just like heads and shoulders and, like, you know, light years beyond the other gods. And he then creates heaven and earth from the dismembered great grandmother, and he establishes the heaven and the earth from her body. So, and then the sort of pinnacle of the whole thing, excuse the pun, is that he creates a city, and in the city he causes Babylon to be made. And in the center is the ziggurat, which is it's kind of like a copy of the gods of the gods' domain, but it's in the city. And that's all the Mesopotamian myths end up with a city being built and a tall, important bit in the middle, which was where the gods lived. So in that part of the world at that time, in Bronze Age times, all the cities had a similar layout, but because they were between the was it the Euphrates and the, can't remember the name of the river, it wasn't stable. It wasn't like Egypt. This was quite unstable. So there was floods and there were droughts, and sometimes the whole cities would get washed away, and there was anxiety, and there was quite a lot of battles. So you can imagine that this myth perfectly fits the environment that everybody's existing in. So the Enuma Elish, like I said, was recited on the New Year, and it starts out with the words Enuma Elish. The poem is on 7 tablets, like I said, which the Enuma Elish means when on high. And it's like beginning at the very beginning of time, when on high, the heavens above were not named, nor earth below pronounced by name. Apsu, the first god, and Tiamat, the mother, lived in a space of nothingness, without pastures, or reed beds, or gods, or names, or destinies. And so the two of them mingle their waters together, bringing forth the gods, like I said, and so on and so on. Okay. So what you have is the two gods creating generations of gods. But these new young gods made noise, and they began to irritate the original two gods, who were so used to the void and the quiet and nothingness. And all of a sudden, there's just this, unending racket and energy and enervation. And Tiamat was quite okay with that. She had enough motherliness to her to put up with it. But Apsu was absolutely not putting up with this at all. He was put to the pin of his collar. He yelled at them, told them to quiet down, and eventually he said, look, they're not listening. This is misery. This is just pure misery, right? Can't we just go back to the way it was? Calm, quiet, just the two of us. We could start over, do it better the next time. And Tiamat said, absolutely not. We can't just, I created, they came out of me. We can't just do away with what we've done. Apsu gets fed up anyhow, and he calls for his advisor. Now, all the gods have these advisors. I'm not quite sure what they all had this. Think of it like I don't know, like a butler or a aide de camp. So they all had this one. They all had a particular advisor, and the advisors were very important. They had big roles to play, as you'll see in the poem. But I'm not going to go into all the details. Anyway, Apsu's advisor was called Mumu, and Mumu shows up and says, Apsu said, we're going to have to, work this out with Tiamat. I'm not standing for it any longer. So they went over to Tiamat, and Apsu said, it's about time we killed them all. And Tiamat was so horrified, she became enraged and she screamed, and Apsu would have to just cop on and give them a bit of time, and they were young and they would mature. But Mumu figured that and told Apsu that Tiamat wasn't really, that happy herself, and I think she was putting on a bit of a show. And Mumu whispered, saying that there's a chance that she can, we can make this work. And Apsu was so delighted that he hugged Mumu, and Mumu climbed into his lap, and they kissed. And this happens a lot in this poem. There's a lot of kissing when people it's like sealing a pact or something. But the young gods heard about Apsu's plan to kill them off, and they kind of got a bit scared. And for the first time since anything was created, they fell silent. But the wisest one was, you know, Ea, who decided that these guys were not, there was no way he was going to hang around and let Apsu kill them all. So he plotted with his advisor, and he decides that he's going to kill Apsu. It's quite simple. So he just marches up to Apsu and has a chat with him, and he put a magic spell on him, and Apsu and Mumu were put to sleep. And then he stole Apsu's crown and the mantle of radiance. And then he murdered Apsu and Mumu in their sleep, and, declared victory. And then he set himself up in a palace with his lover, Damina. And what do you think the palace was made out of? The corpse of Apsu. Cozy, very cozy, I'm sure. So there they were, living inside the dead body of the slain Apsu, and they got around to reproducing. And who do you think their wonderful offspring was? But the mighty Marduk. And in that tablet, I think it's about 25 lines of Marduk and how great Marduk was. And did you hear about Marduk? And Marduk was mighty. He was born from the god of wisdom, and he's the wisest of all. And he was suckled by the goddesses, and he was so filled with awesomeness that he was just drop dead gorgeous. His form was proud and strong. His gaze was penetrating. He had massive strength right from the start. And when his grandfather laid eyes on him, he was absolutely overjoyed. Marduk was so perfect. He had something like double or quadruple the amount of godliness than any other god. His limbs were so amazing that nobody could look on them. And he was so gorgeous that he had 4 eyes and 4 ears. And he had this magic jewelry that just sort of floated around his head and shot fire. He was very tall. And it said that he had 10 times more glory than most gods. So with all that beam of light going around his head and all the rest, his grandfather was just besotted with them. So he gave him the 4 winds to play with. So there he was, this mighty, mighty child with, incredible physical attributes. And he's playing with the 4 winds. And then the gods were upset with, it caused a ripple. Marduk's elevation and boasting and all of his shooting fire out of his head and all the rest made waves, and the waves came as far as Tiamat. Now Tiamat at this stage was rightly fed up. While she didn't agree with Apsu wanting to kill all the children, she nevertheless wasn't best pleased about him getting murdered and Mumu too. And then I think she decided that, look, there's no, there's no way she was going to put up with this parading around the likes of Marduk and so forth. And so she decided to raise her own army. And she married her advisor, Kingu. And she elevated Kingu to the point of taking the place of Apsu's place. And she gave him the tablet of destiny and pretty much crowned him and took him as her lover. So there's Kingu in place of Apsu, and Tiamat is hell-bent on actually destroying the children because they've gone too far. And so this is the end. I don't know whether to... I'll describe what Tiamat created, okay? She developed the most fearsome demon weapons. She made snakes that had venom instead of blood, horned serpents, dragons, rabbit dogs, scorpion men, all kinds of chimeric, really, really terrifying creatures. A whole army of them. There was fishmen, there were bullmen, there was a centaur. And then, so there's a whole like list of pretty terrifying creatures. So she's assembling her army, and she's not to be trifled with. And she and Kingu are getting ready to do battle. So that's kind of where we're going to leave it, I think, for now. Sandy, how long have I done? Because they're setting the scene for war.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Let's stop it there. About 15 minutes.
Yeah,
So,
sorry about that.